Welcome to This Week in Christian History, a podcast from the Center for Christian History at Mississippi College. The Center for Christian History is dedicated to expanding knowledge and understanding of Christian history. Our mission is to provide a scholarly, unbiased look at the events, figures, and movements that have shaped Christianity over the centuries. You can visit centerforchristianhistory.com for daily historical highlights. And each week on this podcast, we'll do a deep dive into key moments with Christian history's leading authorities. Our first historical highlight for the week is Emily Divine Wilson. One of the most popular hymns that is still sung today is When We All Get to Heaven. Written by Philadelphia native Eliza Hewitt, the hymn is merely one part of Hewitt's extensive collection of works containing nearly 1,700 hymns. While Hewitt authored When We All Get to Heaven, the melody and instrumentation were composed by another Philadelphia native, Emily Divine Wilson, who died on June 23, 1942. Our next historical highlight is the United States Supreme Court decision in the Engle v. Vitale case. In this decision, which was handed down on June 25, 1962, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of 5 Hyde Park, New York families who sued the state over mandatory prayer in schools. The prayer in question stated, quote, "Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country. Amen." End quote. The lone dissenting vote was Justice Potter Stewart, who remained a justice until 1981, when Sandra Day O'Connor took his place. Stewart thought that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment was not violated because he believed it only prohibited the creation of a unified, government-created church. He viewed state-sponsored prayer as a different matter entirely. Our final historical highlight for the week, and the subject of our deep dive, is the consecration of Samuel Ajayi Crowther. On June 29, 1864, Crowther was consecrated as the first African Anglican bishop. He became the Bishop of the Niger at Canterbury Cathedral under Archbishop Charles Longley. On that same day, Crowther received an honorary doctorate of divinity from the University of Oxford, celebrating his remarkable work in Bible translation and linguistics. Crowther's consecration symbolized both a triumph over his origins in slavery and a major advancement for indigenous leadership in West African Christianity. Today in our deep dive, Nick Walters, director of the Center for Christian History, talks with Melody Maxwell of Acadia Divinity College about the consecration of Samuel Crowther.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Christian History. And once again, we're doing a great deep dive to learn more about something unique and significant that happened this particular week in Christian history. And today, we're focused on June 29th, 1864. And on that day, the very first African was consecrated and made Bishop of the Church of England. And to talk to us a little bit more about that today is Dr. Melody Maxwell, who's an associate professor of history at Acadia Divinity College in Nova Scotia. So welcome to the podcast today, Dr. Maxwell.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you.
Well, and also thank you for lending your talents to being a member of our academic advisory board. We're super extra happy about that to do.
Well, you're kind. I appreciate the work you do. Yeah.
Well, we think it's we're all headed somewhere with it, and hopefully it's somewhere good, right? So that would be a part of it too. So Samuel Ajayi, we don't know exactly how we would say it. Maybe that's the way we'd say it in Wiggins, okay, is Ajayi Crowther, even though his name is spelled Crowther. It seems like that's how some folks would say his name, but he was the guy, right? He was the guy who actually was appointed. So but before we appointed, I mean, was consecrated and was made bishop. So, but before we kind of get around to really understanding more about him, kind of what's some of the background of things that were going on in the world, within the church, and other things that were happening at that time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll just mention a bit. His Nigerian, his Yoruba name was Ajayi, and then Samuel was his Western, or some might call it Christian name. And he was this extraordinary leader. But I would say that what his service is doing is foreshadowing the African dominance of Christianity that happened in the years to come. So Andrew Walls, who's a really well-known mission historian, called him probably the most widely known African Christian of the 19th century,
That's pretty big.
which is significant. But I do want to back up, like you asked me to, and go even all the way back to the early church, right? So you're covering all of Christian history in your
Yes,
podcast, which is admirable. That's a big task. In my classes, I spend one semester and we do 2,000 years of Christian history, and it flies by in 12 weeks. And so I have some empathy for what you're doing here. So when you think about it, the church arose, it came out of the Mediterranean world, right?
Mhm.
So you might see paintings or things that, you think of white Europeans for the first Christians, but they really weren't. They were brown-skinned folks from the Middle East. And so from the Middle East, Christianity really spreads then to other regions of the world. So, we don't think about it, but from the early days, there were Christians in countries like India, the Thomas Christians, Ethiopia, the church there, very ancient, and China. We have evidence of that as well. Only later does Christianity spread to Europe. So it starts out in the Mediterranean world, then spreads to Europe. In the Middle Ages, becomes dominant in Europe, and so that's sort of the context some of us know. And by the 19th century, I would say, this time we're talking about today, Christianity was really centered around the European world. But I just want us to recognize this wasn't always the case, and it will not always be the case. And so Crowther is sort of leading us into this new era. So, but let me make sure I situate myself back in the 19th century.
Sure.
You have European colonization, trade, you have colonies on different continents. And so, there's some negative things about colonization. They're exploiting natural resources and the labor of indigenous peoples. I'm not here to debate the good and bad of that movement, but I will say that missionaries came. Sometimes colonizers sort of cleared the way for the missionaries to come, but they weren't the same. They weren't hand in hand. Sometimes they conflicted with each other. They didn't have the same motives, but there's a complexity in the history there, but beyond what probably we can get into here. But we have Catholic mission work that happens first, and we get Protestant mission work. And so we're moving into the era of modern missions in the 19th century. So William Carey and his colleagues go to India, 1793, considered the father of modern missions, although we've found out that George Lyle went before that, actually. But anyway, by the 19th century, we have these missionaries from Europe and North America who are traveling around the world seeking to evangelize people. And in many cases, it's unfortunate to think of this today, but they also said they wanted to civilize the people. So we have hindsight, and we can see that imposing any particular culture along with the gospel, particularly Western culture, is not a wise move, but it was common at the time. And so these missionaries are going and evangelizing, also bringing cultural change, some for good, some for bad. But Africa starts to become a center of Christian mission work. It was, you might have heard it called the white man's graveyard at the time, because a lot of missionaries, once they got there, they would die from tropical diseases. And really sadly, we also have the transatlantic slave trade going on at this time, as traders, they're kidnapping and transporting millions of Africans across the ocean to enslave them, I guess.
Well, I mean, part of that too, right, was by this time, where the Europeans were doing their colonization, they'd already done all the North and South America that they were, going to get done, right? And so the British obviously were taking the super lead over into the Southeast, and maybe but by this time, that we're talking about here for the time period of this missionary work, Africa was kind of the big spot to go to, right? I mean, it was maybe other countries, right, started to get into the game, if you will, that had not been into it, Belgium and some others like that, the Germans and others that said, hey, we kind of missed out on this first wave, and so we want to get in on this wave. Maybe France is trying to reinvent themselves and come back into the world. They don't seem to be as focused on doing mission work as maybe as what would have happened throughout Great Britain. And I may not have that correct, but this is kind of where the, if you're going to hunt where the ducks are, as they say, if you're going to go to some spot where where in their mind needed to be mission work that actually were being done, Africa was kind of a big spot. Is that probably
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And they, as it makes sense, they started in the coastal areas because those were easier to access, and then went in some of the rivers, and then finally to the inland areas.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. So how does this all kind of fit into Bishop Crowther's story? How does that, knowing that that's kind of the background?
Yeah, that's a great question. So he he really lives across the 19th century. He was born in 1808 in what today is Nigeria, in the Yoruba land where the Yoruba people still are today. Um, and so he is in this context of mission work, and also, unfortunately, slavery, the slave trade, because when he's about 13 years old, African slave hunters came and captured him and his family.
Mm,
I can't imagine how terrible and traumatic that must have been. He never saw his father again, actually.
wow.
Um, they were separated, and it was years before he saw his mother and sister again, like many years. So he was taken to the coast to a Portuguese slave ship to be sold into slavery. I mean, the terrible transatlantic slave trade that we hear about. But so what actually happened is this Portuguese ship was sailing, and then a British ship captured them and freed the slaves, because by this time slavery was outlawed. Yeah, I think I have to do the math, but the British were
Seems right.
capturing them and took them. They didn't send them back home, though. They took them to Sierra Leone, which they'd sort of made as a colony for freed Africans. And so, can you imagine being like 13 years old, having this terrible event happen to you, and then you're dropped in this strange land
Mm,
with a strange language without your family? And so I have a lot of respect for how he managed to persist and even achieve and thrive in these really difficult circumstances. So one thing he learns to speak English, and he gets involved in studies as a student, and he shows that he's a really excellent student. He gets involved with the Church of England, and as I mentioned, he took on the name Samuel after he was baptized. He learned a trade as a carpenter, and also as a teacher and a missionary. So this is a very talented, multi-talented, and busy guy. He grows up, he marries a woman named Susan Asano Thompson, and they have 6 children. So he has gone from a difficult life and made it into a good life. There are many others in Sierra Leone who have similar situations as far as their backgrounds, where they had come from. But he is involved with the Church of England and different Anglican Church Missionary Society missionaries. And so they recognize his abilities, and they ask him to go with them in 1841 down the Niger River in an expedition. He goes down the river with more than 100 European missionaries, and he really shows his strength, his character then. Um, One source says that his work was the most thorough of anybody who was in the expedition, and he was a really significant contributor to it. And something else that happens during this trip is that most of the Europeans fall ill with malaria, other diseases, because they're not acclimated to the tropical climate
mm-hmm.
and conditions. And so he survives and even thrives during this voyage. And they say, like, we like what you do. Could you keep doing it more? He goes on 2 more major expeditions down the river in the course of his life, and has really proved himself to these Europeans. He, in 1843, so a couple years later, he travels to England, which is a very significant step, right? That's pretty far away.
Sure.
You can't just hop on a plane like we can these days. And so he became familiar with the British world as well as his Yoruba and Nigerian context and those roots. So he was a good bridge across the cultures. It became that. And so he was actually ordained as an Anglican priest in that time at 1843. They had to, like, the closest bishop was the one who would ordain you, and the one in London was the closest to West Africa, if you can imagine. So really the church was centered in England, Europe, and so there was not anything in his region. So he was really helping open up things.
Right. We shouldn't think about this as the greater, bigger church, right? That would have had places all over that would have been Catholic and others. But for the Church of England, right, there's the closest one was there in London,
Right.
right?
England, yeah, that's
as
right.
compared to what we were looking at for West Africa, right?
You can watch Ceressid Nick's interview with Melody Maxwell on the Center for Christian History website at centerforchristianhistory.com. This Week in Christian History is produced for the Center for Christian History by Blue and Gold Media at Mississippi College, in cooperation with the MC Department of Communication. For episode transcripts and more information, visit centerforchristianhistory.com. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube Music, or wherever fine podcasts are found. Our next episode is coming next week. Thank you for listening.